So the third example was when I moved from my lifelong home in California to Montana. And this is probably the biggest one. This has been a doozy, just because of how massive and life-changing it has been. So keep in mind, I left my lifelong home. Like I was born and raised in California, never left, never lived anywhere else. Everyone, everything I knew was there. This career that I had spent 20 years building, like all of that was bye bye because I was moving. So August 14th has been 2 years that we've been here in Montana. And I am only very, 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 very recently, like past 2 weeks recently, starting to feel like my kids and I can like truly start to settle in. In most respects, this was a leap more than a push. Or no, this leap was more of a push than it was a leap, because I really did not feel like I had any other choice except to leave California. Um, I just didn't. It did not feel like it was adoption. It felt like you better leave now while you can leave. So it was difficult, but that was where I was at. So when I made the decision to move, it was toward the end of 2021. But I hadn't really told anyone outside of like my family at that point in time. And I wasn't sure where to move yet. I just knew like I had definitely decided, okay, we are moving, we're gonna leave California within the next year. That was it. So then it was like, okay, but now where are we gonna move to? So I started researching different states and I came down to a couple, it was a choice between two states. I had started, there was four that I was really kind of like, no, I don't know which one to pick kind of a thing. And I was looking at different things like, all the different things you would want to take into consideration and look at when you're making this type of a decision. So got down to two, like I said. And so I prayed and I asked God to guide me to the right state for us to move to. About an hour later, I heard so at this time my desk was in my den, which is where my mom lived at the time, and so she had like her little couch and her TV and stuff behind me when I was working. So I heard the anchor on the news she was watching on the TV say something about Montana, and then he followed it with something that was basically an answer to one of the things I was kind of unsure about with picking Montana because I just didn't know for sure like what the answer was. And so this whatever this guy said was like the answering that question. So I was like, all right, thank you, God. So I knew, okay, you're telling me this is where we're gonna go. So from that point forward, it became a process of me consulting with God on most aspects of moving and surrendering almost everything to Him throughout the whole process. So we moved here sight unseen. I had to leave everything and everyone that was familiar, as I mentioned, everything that I knew. And there was no way that I could have navigated the move or the subsequent 2 years since we got in here without God. So this, leap of faith, since that's what we often think of these things as, was really more of a push. It was like, I know I got to do this, but I don't know how to go about it. I don't know where to go. I think my dog is agreeing with me. And so God, like I said, the relationship with God was critical and surrender again was very critical in this whole thing. So the last example is when God called me out of my job this last October, despite not having a new job, despite not having any income through my business at that point in time. And so this is the last one that like I said, I'll talk about today, but it's a great example of a leap of faith towards something that you want. So this in my mind is like a true leap of faith in the sense of what a lot of us might think of when we hear that term. So, I dreamt of having my own business for many, many years. I wasn't quite sure what to do exactly, how to go about it. I think for a long time I spent years like waiting for this like miraculous like idea to come down from heaven or something. But eventually, um, I had this idea and this inspiration to start my blog. So I started with that. I started the blog in 2019. So fast forward to 2022, I formed my LLC and, basically made my business official. And then not too long after we landed here in Montana, I started my previous job. And I figured, okay, well, I'll continue building my business on the side because at this point I was getting a little more traction. It was starting to gel, like, what I wanted to do, what exactly the business was going to do. But there was a lot of stuff I still had to, get more clear on and all of that. So fast forward 7 months into my job, I'm pretty unhappy at this point. This was coupled with what was roughly a 50% pay difference in the wrong direction from my previous pay. So I'm, at this point between things not being so great and that, I'm kind of like, what the heck am I doing? So then about July last year, I was starting to begin to manifest my way out of this job. I was just trying to like, what is it going to be? Because I knew I wanted, to go all in on the business. I wanted to have the business. I just didn't know how to get from where I was to that. So nothing seemed to be working in my business at that point in time, but I was starting to try to manifest my way out of it. So this continued until August when I started to feel this nudge. Florence Scovel Shinn in her books and when she talks about people she used to work with in her what she called treatments, she would call it a hunch. But I started to get the hunch or the nudge to leave my job. So I couldn't see how I was going to make that work. So I kept dismissing this nudge, right? Because I was like, there's no way I can do that. Like, how am I going to do that? That's crazy. But that's usually your first clue that you are being called to take a leap of faith. So by September, I could no longer deny that I was in fact being nudged to leave my job. So I finally reached the point where I had to decide to leap and trust that I would be caught with no evidence telling me that that was going to be the case. So I decided to take the leap, and the only question left was when at that point. Well, it turned out the answer was immediately because the next day something happened where I was no longer able to wait. And so I gave notice. And yeah, then just like the couple other examples, it was like it was just pretty quick after that. Like I gave notice, there was a lot of prayer and surrender leading up to that point. But also God was giving me a lot of confirmations. He was like confirming things before I gave notice, and then it was even more of that after I gave notice. I mean, as if you're ever going to get a neon blinking sign from God, that's what I was getting in terms of these signs and synchronicities that he was sending me once I made the decision and then the point at which that I gave notice. So there are 4 examples from the past 10 years of these different triggering events that had set me on my own walk in faith, moving in faith. And you can see from these that it wasn't always me consciously taking like the leap of faith. They're all situations where I was either faced with a problem or some desire that I had no idea how to resolve or achieve on my own. But there was some kind of deep knowing and feeling around it. All of these required me to place my trust in God and move forward when I couldn't see the path ahead of me. So that is kind of what I wanted to talk about today, just to give you a sense of like, what do these triggering events look like? What does that first phase kind of look like? Because again, not always super obvious. So I will leave it at that.